The polished steel floor of the grand concourse was so clean that Mark could see his own tired reflection staring back at him. It was a disturbing sight. He looked small compared to the towering figures that walked past him, their robes made of fabrics that seemed to shift color when they moved. Mark adjusted his tie, feeling the scratchy synthetic material against his neck. He was sweating, but he tried to keep his face still. Beside him, Lisa stood with her back straight, holding a datapad so tightly her knuckles were white. Behind them, David, their head of security, scanned the room with eyes that had seen too much combat. To the aliens of the Galactic Council, humans were primitive. To David, these aliens were soft targets that had never known a real war. They had been waiting for 3 hours. In human terms, that was rude. In council terms, it was a message. They were making the humans wait to show them their place. Mark looked up at the massive dome ceiling. It projected a false sky of a gentle purple nebula. It was beautiful, but it felt fake. Everything here felt fake. The air smelled too sweet, like flowers and chemicals. It lacked the smell of rain, dirt, or smoke. It lacked the smell of life. "The session is starting," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the room. The heavy doors at the far end of the hall slid open silently. A group of attendants, floating slightly above the ground, entered first. Then came the counselors. There were 12 of them, representing the most powerful species in the galaxy. They did not walk. They glided. They did not sit. They hovered on platforms of light. Mark took a deep breath and motioned for David and Lisa to follow him. They walked toward the central podium where the humans were allowed to stand. It was a small circle of light far below the raised thrones of the council. It was designed to make anyone standing there look up and feel small. The High Counselor, a being named Valerius, who looked like a tall, thin human made of glass, raised a hand. The room went silent instantly. "We are here to conclude the matter of Earth," Valerius said. His voice didn't come from a mouth. It echoed directly inside their heads. It was cold and sounded like wind blowing through a tunnel. Mark stepped up to the microphone. He had practiced this speech 1,000 times. He had to be perfect. "Honored counselors," Mark began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. "Humanity comes to you not as beggars, but as partners. We have looked at your charts. We have studied your charts. We have studied your trade routes. We know you face dangers in the dark sectors. We offer you something you lack: industrial power, military grit, and a fleet that can protect your borders. We do not want handouts. We want to work. We want to trade. We want to help protect this galaxy." He paused. He hoped his passion would translate through the language filters. "We are a young species, yes, but we are fast. We learn quickly. Let us join you. Let us prove that we are worthy of the stars." The silence that followed was heavy. Valerius exchanged a look with the counselor next to him, a creature covered in feathers that rippled with agitation. Then Valerius looked down at Mark. The glass face of the High Counselor showed no emotion, no pity, no anger, just nothing. "You speak of partnership," Valerius said, the mental voice sounding bored, "but you do not understand the nature of the galaxy. You are like children playing with firecrackers and calling them weapons. You are violent. You are chaotic. Your history is written in the blood of your own kind." Mark opened his mouth to object, to explain that humanity had moved past its wars, but Valerius spoke over him. "The Council has debated your application for 3 cycles. We have watched your wars. We have monitored your radio waves. We have seen your greed and your anger. We have come to a decision." The lights in the room dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the humans standing in the circle. "We reject the application of Earth," Valerius stated. The words hit Mark like a physical blow. Humanity is denied membership in the Galactic Assembly. Lisa gasped softly, dropping her datapad. David shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively toward the hidden pistol at his hip, but he stopped himself. Mark held up a hand to stop them both. He had to remain calm. "May I ask why?" Mark asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "We have resources. We have soldiers. We can offer so much." "It is not about what you can offer," Valerius said. "It is about what you are. You are a virus waiting to happen. If we give you access to the stars, you will spread your chaos. You will disrupt the peace we have held for 1,000 years. Therefore, we will not allow you to spread." Valerius made a gesture, and a holographic map appeared in the air between them. It showed the Sol system, Earth's sun. "Effective immediately, a travel embargo is placed on the Sol system," Valerius continued. "No human vessel is permitted to leave the asteroid belt. No trade ship may enter. Your communication relays will be monitored. You are confined to your home star system. You will stay there until you have learned to be civilized." "This is imprisonment," Mark said, his voice rising despite himself. "You can't just lock an entire species on a single planet." "We can, and we have," Valerius replied, his mental voice turning sharp like a knife. "Do not test us, human. We are removing a splinter before it becomes an infection. Be grateful we do not cleanse the infection entirely." "Cleanse?" David stepped forward, his face dark red. "Are you threatening us?" "I am stating a fact," Valerius said, turning away as if the conversation was already over. "The guards will escort you out. Do not return." The counselors began to fade from view, their holograms flickering out. The lights in the chamber came back up to their blinding brightness. 2 large armored robots rolled toward the humans. Mark stood there for a moment, stunned. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a death sentence for their future. Without the stars, humanity would wither. They would run out of resources. They would turn on each other again. "Let's go," Mark said quietly. "We can't just accept this," Lisa said, tears of frustration in her eyes. "They can't do this. They just did," Mark said. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing on the pristine floor. David and Lisa followed. The robots herded them, but they didn't need to push. The humans were walking fast. They left the grand hall and entered the busy corridor of the station. Aliens of all shapes and sizes moved around them, ignoring them completely. To them, the humans were nothing, just a nuisance that had been dealt with. Mark watched them. He saw their lazy movements. He saw their soft skin. He saw their arrogance. They thought Earth was weak. They thought humans were just loud barbarians who would eventually kill each other off in their cage. They walked out of the station and into their transport ship. It was an old, clunky vessel compared to the sleek ships of the aliens, but it was theirs. As the airlock hissed shut, cutting off the smell of the alien station, the atmosphere changed. David slammed his fist against the metal wall of the ship. "They think they can put us in a zoo," he growled. Lisa sat down in the pilot's chair, her hands shaking as she started the pre-flight checks. "What are we going to tell the people back home? That we are grounded? That we are prisoners?" Mark sat in the command seat. He looked out the window at the vast open space. He saw the stars, millions of them burning bright and free. The council said humanity was too violent. They said humans were chaotic. "No," Mark said. His voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was hard, like iron. "No what?" David asked, looking at him. "We are not going back to Earth to tell them we are giving up," Mark said. He turned to look at his two friends. "The Council controls the inner worlds. They control the trade routes that go through the center of the galaxy. They think that if they block the door, the house is empty. Lisa paused, looking back at him. What are you thinking, Mark? They told us we are rejected, Mark said, a small, dangerous smile forming on his lips. They didn't say we owned nothing. They just said we can't play in their backyard anymore. Where are we going to go? David asked. Every chart says the space around the core is theirs. Mark pointed out the window, past the bright, orderly stars of the Council's territory, toward the dark, dusty edge of the galaxy map. They call it the Outer Rim, Mark said. It's uncharted. It's full of asteroids and radiation and storms. The Council is too scared to go there. They say it's a graveyard. That sounds terrible, Lisa said, frowning. It sounds like a place where nobody bothers you, Mark said. The Council looks at the stars and sees gardens to be tended. Humans look at the stars and see places to build. If they don't want us in the center, we will take the edge. David grinned, catching on. The rim is rough. If we survive there, we'll be tougher than them. Exactly, Mark said. They rejected us because they fear what we might become. So, we are going to go where they aren't. And we are going to build a fleet that doesn't ask for permission. Let them have their polished chairs and their pretty robes. We will take the dirt and the dark, and we will turn it into a fortress. Set a course for the drift, Mark ordered. We aren't going home yet. We need to find the others. We need to find the people who are crazy enough to jump into the dark. Lisa didn't hesitate. She punched in the coordinates, bypassing the standard return routes. The engines roared to life, shaking the ship. The transport lifted off, leaving the arrogant gleam of the Council station behind. As they broke orbit and turned the ship away from the core, the stars ahead looked different. They weren't just lights in the sky anymore. They were a challenge. The Council had made a mistake. They thought fear would keep humans in line. But they didn't know that when you back a human into a corner, they don't sit down and cry. They look for a way out. And if there is no door, they make one. As the ship accelerated toward the unknown void of the outer rim, Mark sat back in his seat. The rejection was just the beginning. The real game was about to start. And this time, the Council wouldn't be making the rules. The ship jumped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder that rattled the bolts in the floor panels. For Eric, the pilot, the shaking felt like an old friend. He gripped the controls with rough hands, his eyes scanning the screens that were flashing red warnings. Outside the small window, the view was not the beautiful, orderly stars of the core worlds. It was a mess of purple and black swirling clouds. "We made it," Eric said, his voice raspy from the long silence of the jump. "But the computer doesn't know where we are." John, the architect, unbuckled his safety harness and floated slightly in the low gravity before pulling himself toward the main viewport. He looked tired. His face was pale, and his eyes were rimmed with red from lack of sleep. But when he looked out at the chaotic nebula, a spark of life returned to them. "Does it matter?" John asked. "As long as we aren't in their territory, the coordinates don't matter. We are in the outer rim." The fleet behind them, consisting of 50 massive colonial ships, began to emerge from the swirling clouds of the jump gate. They looked ugly compared to the ships of the Council. They were bulky, made of thick steel plates welded together by human hands in the shipyards of Mars and the Moon. They were painted in dull grays, oranges, and yellows, colors used for construction work, not for elegance, but they were tough. They could survive impacts that would shatter the delicate glass ships of the aliens. The sensors began to beep, a proximity alarm. "What is that?" Eric asked, tapping the screen. "I'm reading massive gravity signatures." John pulled up the star map. It was incomplete. The council had never mapped this region because they considered it a useless junkyard. We need to find a place to land, something solid. These ships weren't built to float in space forever. They were built to be built upon. Taking us in, Eric said. He pushed the throttle forward. The ship groaned as it pushed through a thick field of cosmic dust. It was like flying through a sandstorm. Visibility was almost zero. Eric had to rely entirely on his instruments, trusting his gut instinct as a pilot. For hours they flew through the dark. The fleet followed in formation, a silent armada of refugees. On board the other ships, millions of people were waiting. Families, workers, soldiers, they had packed up their entire lives and left the only home they had ever known because a group of aliens told them they didn't belong. The mood in the fleet was a mix of terror and grim determination. Suddenly, the dust storm cleared. "Whoa!" Eric whispered. Below them stretched a planet that looked like a bruised piece of fruit. It was a dark, rusty red color. Swirling storms the size of continents covered its surface. It wasn't blue and green like Earth. It looked angry and hostile. "Atmosphere is toxic," the computer droned. "High concentration of sulfur. Gravity is 1.5 times Earth's standard. Surface temperature is extreme." "It's perfect," John said. Eric looked at him like he was crazy. "Did you hear the computer? It's a death trap. The air will melt our lungs in seconds." "Look at the readings for the crust," John pointed at a screen. "Iron, titanium, rare earth metals. The ground is rich with everything we need to build. And the gravity? It will make us stronger. The air? We can fix the air. We can fix the gravity. We can't fix a lack of resources." John turned to the communication array. "This is Vanguard 1 to the Colonial Fleet. We have found our new home. Prepare for orbital insertion. It's going to be a rough landing." The landing was indeed rough. The massive colonial ships were not designed for aerodynamics. They fell through the thick atmosphere like stones. The heat shields glowed bright red as the friction burned against the hull. Inside the ships, people held on to each other, screaming as the ships shook violently. Eric fought with the controls. "Come on, you ugly brick! Fly!" he yelled through gritted teeth. The ground was coming up fast. He could see jagged mountains and sharp canyons rushing toward them. "Brace! Brace!" John yelled over the intercom. With a deafening screech of tearing metal, the ship hit the ground. It skidded for miles, tearing up the red soil and crushing rocks beneath its weight. Finally, with a jolt that threw everyone out of their seats, the ship stopped. Silence filled the cabin. Dust and smoke drifted through the air. Emergency lights flickered on. "Status?" John coughed, pulling himself up from the floor. Eric was already checking the systems. "Hull integrity at 70%. We are alive. That's all that matters." All around the planet, other ships were crashing or landing in the rough terrain. It wasn't a graceful arrival. It was a collision. But one by one, the ships reported in. They were down. The doors opened. The first humans stepped out onto the soil of the outer rim. They had to wear heavy pressure suits, blowing dust that scratched against their faceplates. The sky was a murky brown color, blocking out the distant sun. It was miserable. It was cold. It was ugly. But as John stood at the top of the ramp, looking out over the sea of red dust and distant mountains, he saw something amazing. He saw the other ships landing. He saw lights turning on in the windows of the massive structures. He saw vehicles driving out, already starting to level the ground. Eric walked up beside him, clapping his hand on John's shoulder. "Well," Eric said, looking around, "it's not Paris." "No," John smiled behind his visor. It's better. It's ours. The work began immediately. There was no time to rest. In the core worlds, the Council would have sent drones to build cities. They would have used weather control to make the sky blue. Humans didn't have that technology. They had hands, and they had will. Giant excavators rolled out of the cargo bays. They were rusty, oil-stained machines that had been used for mining on asteroids. Now they were tearing into the crust of this new planet. The sound of industry was constant. The clang of steel on steel. The roar of engines. The shouting of orders. John oversaw the construction of the first habitat dome. It was a massive geodesic structure made of thick glass and steel. They didn't put it on flat ground. They anchored it into the side of a cliff to use the rock as a shield against the wind. "We need to connect the power grid," John shouted over the noise to a group of engineers. "Get the fusion reactors online before nightfall. It's going to get cold." The planet rotated slowly. The night lasted for 30 hours. The temperature dropped to freezing. But inside the dome, the lights came on. They were harsh, industrial floodlights, but they pushed back the darkness. Eric was busy organizing the scouting teams. He took a small group in rovers to look for water. They drove over jagged terrain, climbing mountains that would have been impossible to climb on Earth. The high gravity made every movement exhausting. Just walking felt like carrying a heavy backpack. But Eric noticed something. After a few days, the complaining stopped. The men and women were getting stronger. Their bodies were adapting to the weight. They found a frozen river underground. It wasn't liquid water, but ice. They blasted it with mining charges and hauled the blocks back to the base. "We have water," Eric announced over the radio when he returned. The cheer that went up over the comms was louder than the wind. Weeks turned into months. The colony wasn't pretty. It was a maze of pipes, wires, and metal shacks. But it was standing. The humans were breathing air that was scrubbed and recycled, but it was air they controlled. They were eating food grown in hydroponic labs that tasted like nothing, but it kept them alive. One evening, John and Eric stood on the observation deck of the main ship, which had now become the command center. They looked out at the colony. Lights were flickering across the valley. Smoke was rising from the factories. The wind was still howling. Dust was still blowing, but it felt alive. "Do you think they are looking for us?" Eric asked, looking up at the murky sky where the stars were hidden. "The Council?" John took a sip of synthesized coffee. It was bitter, but hot. "Maybe. But they won't come here. They hate dirt. They hate mess. Look at this place, Eric. It's a mess. It's loud. It's chaotic. It's everything they hate about us." "It's home," Eric said. "Yes," John nodded. "They rejected us because they thought we were too weak to survive without them. They thought if they locked the door, we would die in the cold. But they were wrong. We don't need their gardens. We can build our own in the mud." The radio crackled. "Command, this is Sector 4. We found a deposit of uridium. Pure grade, enough to fuel a fleet for 10 years. John looked at Eric and grinned. "You hear that? They gave us the junkyard, but they forgot to check what was in the trash." The outer rim was hard. It tried to kill them every day with storms, gravity, and isolation. But for the first time in history, humanity was truly free. No one was telling them what to build, how to act, or where they could go. They were alone in the dark. But as John watched the construction bots weld a new skyscraper into the night sky, he realized they weren't afraid of the dark anymore. The darkness was just a canvas, and humans were ready to paint it in steel and fire. The red dust of the colony planet never really went away. It coated the windows, the machines, and the skin of the people living there. 5 years had passed since the Great Landing, and the initial fear of being stranded had turned into a busy, noisy routine. The colony was no longer just a camp. It was a sprawling city of metal and glass built into the side of the canyon. But the environment was still winning the war against human bodies. Rachel stood in her medical lab, looking at a hologram of a human lung. It was gray and spotted. She was tired. Her shift had lasted 16 hours. The air scrubbers in the colony were working at full capacity, but the outside air was thick with heavy metals and sulfur. Even inside the suits, people were getting sick. The gravity, which was 50% stronger than Earth's, was crushing their bones and wearing out their hearts. "It's not working," Rachel said to the empty room. She wiped a smudge of grease from her forehead. "We are trying to adapt Earth people to a demon world." She walked out of the lab and into the corridor. The colony was loud. The walls vibrated with the sound of generators. Everyone walked with a heavy thud. Even the children moved slower, their muscles thick and dense from fighting the gravity every day. They were getting stronger, but they were also getting tired. Rachel knew they couldn't keep living like this. If they wanted to survive, they had to stop trying to protect themselves from the planet and start becoming part of it. She took the elevator down to the engineering deck, deep in the lower levels where the heat was intense. This was Tom's domain. Tom was a cybernetics expert and mechanic who could build anything with a wrench and a soldering iron. When Rachel walked in, Tom was welding a piece of armor. Sparks flew everywhere, bouncing off his leather apron. He wore a magnifying glass over one eye and looked more like a mad scientist than a doctor. "We have a problem," Rachel shouted over the noise of the machinery. Tom turned off the torch and flipped up his mask. His face was smeared with oil, but he was smiling. "We always have problems, Doc. Is the water filtration breaking again?" "No," Rachel said, walking up to him. "It's us. The suits are too heavy. The filters can't keep up with the dust storms. People are developing rim lung. I've got 10 patients in critical care who can't breathe enough oxygen. Even with the masks, the air is too thin." Tom frowned and wiped his hands on a rag. "So what do you want me to do? I can't change the atmosphere." "You don't need to change the air," Rachel said firmly. "You need to change us and the suits." She pulled out a data drive and plugged it into the shop's computer. A blueprint appeared on the screen. It looked like a skeleton made of metal tubes and hydraulic pistons. "The suits the council uses are soft," Rachel explained. "They are like wearing a second skin. We can't make that here. We don't have the materials, but we have steel. We have hydraulics." Tom looked at the screen, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the design. "This is an exoskeleton, but it's rough." "It's the Hellweave concept," Rachel said. "We connect the suit directly to the user's nerves. The suit carries the weight, not the muscles. We add heavy filters directly into the chest plate, so they breathe clean air that is pushed into their lungs by force. It's ugly, Tom. It's clunky. It will make a human look like a walking tank, but it will let them work outside for 12 hours without collapsing." Tom started to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling laugh. A walking tank. The council would laugh at us. They like things that look elegant and smooth. "We aren't trying to win a beauty contest," Rachel snapped. "We aren't trying to survive." Tom's expression became serious. He looked closer at the designs. "I can build this. I can use the scrap from the old landers. But the neural link, that's tricky. If the suit moves wrong, it could break a soldier's leg." "That's where I come in," Rachel said. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small vial of blue liquid. "I call it Titan serum. It's a genetic treatment. It modifies the bone density. It makes the bones harder to break. It helps the muscles process oxygen more efficiently." Tom looked at the vial, then at Rachel. "You want to inject people with this?" "I already tested it on myself," Rachel said. She rolled up her sleeve and showed him a small patch on her arm where a synthetic graft was healing. My bone density is up by 20%. I can lift twice what I could last month. Tom stared at her with a mix of shock and respect. You're crazy, Doc. You know that. Maybe, Rachel said. But I'm alive. Over the next few months, the lower decks of the colony became a factory of modification. Tom and his team worked day and night, stripping the old mining mechs for parts. They built the first batch of Hellweave suits. They were massive, standing 7 feet tall. They were painted in dull yellow and black hazard stripes. They clanked when they walked. Meanwhile, Rachel administered the serum to the volunteers. Miners, construction workers, and security guards lined up outside the mid-bay. They didn't ask about the side effects. They just wanted to be strong enough to hold a hammer without their arms giving out. The changes happened fast. The men and women grew broader. Their posture changed. They stopped slouching under the high gravity. They looked thicker, harder, like rocks shaped by a river. The real test came on a Tuesday. A massive storm was rolling in from the north. It was a sand-eater, a storm with winds strong enough to strip the paint off the buildings. The main water intake valve, located 3 miles outside the dome, was jamming. If it closed, the colony would lose its water supply. "I'll go," said a voice over the radio. It was a man named Miller. He was one of the first to receive the serum and the new suit. Rachel watched on the monitor as the airlock opened. Miller stepped out. He didn't look like a human in a spacesuit anymore. He looked like a machine. The heavy wind hit him, but he didn't move. The hydraulics in the legs hissed, locking him in place. He walked into the screaming wind. Sand battered his armor, but the thick steel plates just shrugged it off. He reached the intake valve. The manual lever was frozen solid by the cold. Miller grabbed the lever. The sensors in the suit showed his heart rate was steady. He pulled. Metal groaned. The lever, which would have taken 3 normal men to move, began to turn. With a screech, the valve opened. Water began to flow into the colony again. "Job done," Miller said into the radio. His voice was calm. Coming back in. When he returned to the airlock, he was covered in red dust, but he wasn't tired. He took off his helmet. His face was flushed, but he was smiling. His eyes were bright and intense. Rachel noticed that his pupils had changed slightly. They looked like cat eyes, another side effect of the serum designed to help him see in the dark dust storms. "Good suit, Doc," Miller said, clanking his metal hand against the wall. "Felt like I wasn't wearing anything at all." Rachel looked at Tom. Tom was grinning from ear to ear. "See?" Tom said. "I told you. Ugly works." As the weeks went by, the colony changed. The streets were filled with people in the bulky armor. They moved with a heavy, rhythmic thud that echoed through the halls. They were faster, stronger, and tougher than the humans who had arrived 5 years ago. But Rachel noticed another change. It wasn't just physical. The people were different now. They didn't complain about the cold or the dust. They didn't look at the sky and wish for Earth. They looked at the storms with hunger. They saw resources in the rocks. They saw challenges to crush. One evening, Rachel was sitting in the cafeteria eating a bowl of nutrient paste. It tasted like cardboard, but she was hungry. She looked around the room. The workers there were laughing. They were arm wrestling, slamming their heavy metal gloves onto the tables. A young man, no older than 20, walked by. He had been born on the ship during the journey. He had grown up in the rim. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sharp eyes. He wore his exoskeleton like a second skin. He didn't walk like a refugee. He walked like a predator. Rachel realized then that the Council had made a terrible mistake. The Council had rejected humanity because they were afraid of human violence. They thought that by locking humans away, They would stop humans from becoming dangerous. But they were wrong. By sending humanity to the rim, they had forced them to evolve. They had taken away the comfortable lives, the soft beds, and the easy food. In return, humanity had taken the hardest planet in the galaxy and made it their gym. They were no longer just humans. They were something new. They were rim-born. Tom sat down next to her with a tray of food. "The new radar arrays are up," he said between bites. "We can see 3 times as far now. We found some interesting signals coming from the asteroid belt nearby. Looks like some kind of old tech. Maybe alien." Rachel nodded. "We should go get it." "Yeah," Tom agreed. "We should go take it." He didn't say we should study it or we should ask for permission. He just said, take. That was the new way. In the rim, you didn't ask. You took. The council sat in their soft chairs, light years away, thinking they were safe. They didn't know that the rejected children had grown up. They didn't know that out in the dark, humans were building armor and drinking serum that made them into monsters. The council had thought humanity was a virus, but they had forgotten that viruses mutate, and the mutation that was happening in the outer rim was the most dangerous thing the galaxy had ever seen. The alarm did not sound like a bell. It was a loud, digital screech that made Jason's teeth hurt. He had been sleeping in his chair in the command center, his boots up on the desk. As soon as the noise hit the air, he was on the floor, his hand reaching for his pulse rifle. Years of living on the edge of survival had made his reflexes sharp, almost predatory. "Report," Jason yelled, running up the metal ramp to the main radar screen. Amy was already there, typing furiously on her keyboard. The blue light from the screen reflected in her eyes, making them look cold. "3 contacts," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "They just dropped out of hyperspace. No stealth, they aren't hiding." Jason looked at the screen. 3 red dots were moving fast toward the colony. "Identification?" he asked. "Class signatures match the Galactic Council," Amy said. "Specifically the 7th Patrol Squadron. They are small ships, fast and agile." Jason walked to the heavy reinforced window. Even from inside the command tower, he could see the flashes in the upper atmosphere. 3 sleek silver ships were descending through the clouds. They were beautiful, shaped like teardrops with glowing blue engines. They looked like toys compared to the blocky gray fortress that the human colony had become. "They must have picked up our energy spike when we tested the new reactors," Jason said, checking his weapon. "They aren't here to say hello." "They are hailing us," Amy said. She tapped a button, and a voice filled the room. It was arrogant and smooth, translated from an alien language into English. "Unregistered human settlement," the voice said. "This is Commander Velos of the Galactic Council. You are in violation of Council space boundaries. Your presence here is a stain on the galaxy. Power down your reactors and prepare for immediate evacuation. You will be taken to a detention center. You have 10 minutes. Jason laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He grabbed the radio handset. "This is Jason of the Rim Colonies. If you want us to leave, you'll have to come down here and make us. But be warned, the gravity here is heavy, and we don't like guests." "Do not mock us," Commander Velos replied. "We are authorized to cleanse this infestation. You had your chance to surrender peacefully." The transmission cut out. "They are locking weapons," Amy said. She didn't panic. She just looked at Jason. "Defense grid is online. The railguns are charged. The missile bays are open." Jason looked at the tactical map. The council ships were taking positions above the colony. They were hovering arrogantly, assuming the humans would be terrified. They were used to species that bowed down as soon as the silver ships appeared. They didn't understand that these humans had been fighting the planet itself for 5 years just to stay alive. A few alien ships weren't scary, they were just another target. "Hold fire," Jason ordered. "Let them shoot first. We need to see what they have." On the screen, the lead ship glowed brightly. A beam of pure blue energy shot down from the sky. It was a precision laser designed to disable a shield generator or a weapons battery. It struck the main bunker on the north ridge. Instead of an explosion, there was a loud clang. The beam hit the roof of the bunker, which was made of 5-meter-thick reinforced concrete and scrap metal. The laser scratched the surface, turning the rock red-hot, but it didn't penetrate. "Their weapons are too precise," Jason said, watching the tactical readout. "They are trying to disable us, not destroy us. They want to capture the tech." "Wrong move," Amy said. "Shall we engage?" "Light them up," Jason said. The ground shook. Across the valley, hidden, camouflaged doors in the cliffs slid open. Massive artillery pieces rose up. They were not elegant energy weapons. They were kinetic rail guns, long, thick tubes that used magnetic fields to fire heavy metal slugs at incredible speeds. The air ripped apart as the first volley fired. The sound was like thunder rolling back and forth. Dozens of metal slugs streaked upward, leaving trails of white smoke. The silver ships tried to dodge. They were fast, moving in smooth, calculated patterns. But the humans didn't aim at the ships. They aimed at where the ships were going to be. One of the slugs struck the rear engine of the lead ship. It wasn't a clean cut through a shield like the aliens used. It was a hammer blow. The ship spun violently, trailing smoke and fire. It didn't explode, it was too well made for that. But it was crippled. What was that? The alien commander shouted over the open channel, panic replacing the arrogance. "Your weapons are barbaric." "It's physics." "Alien," Jason muttered. "Target the other two," Jason ordered into the comms. "Missile teams, use the swarm." From the ground, hundreds of small rockets launched. They looked cheap and primitive. They wobbled in the air as they flew, looking like a swarm of angry bees. The alien ships tried to shoot them down with their point defense lasers, but there were too many of them. The aliens expected 1 or 2 high-tech torpedoes. They didn't know how to deal with a flood of dumb, cheap rockets that just kept coming. Explosions lit up the sky. One of the alien ships took 20 hits to its forward shields, overloading them. A final rocket struck the bridge, and the ship spiraled down into the canyon, crashing in a fireball. The last ship tried to retreat. It turned its nose upward, firing its engines hard to escape the atmosphere. Amy's fingers danced across her keyboard. "No, you don't," she whispered. "Calculating trajectory. Locked." She pressed a single red button. The colony's surface-to-orbit railgun, the biggest gun they had, fired one last shot. The slug traveled miles in a second, catching the ship just as it was reaching space. The ship tore in half. The debris rained down like falling stars. In less than 10 minutes, the disciplinary squadron was destroyed. Silence returned to the command center. Jason lowered his binoculars. Smoke was rising from the crash sites in the distance. His men were cheering on the radios, high-fiving and shouting. It was their first real victory against the galaxy that had abandoned them. Amy looked at her screen. "We intercepted a transmission just before the last ship broke up," she said, her voice serious. It was a distress signal. "They called for help?" Jason asked, leaning against the console. "Yes," Amy said. "But they didn't ask for more police. They addressed the High Council. They used the code Red Sun. That's a military emergency code. They told the Council that the humans are, I'm quoting, possessing weaponry beyond their primitive classification. Jason smirked. They think we have high-tech secrets. They don't understand we just throw rocks really hard. The council will send a real fleet next, Amy warned. Not just 3 police ships, a battle fleet. Good, Jason said. He stood up straight and looked out the window. The colony was still there. The lights were still on. The humans were still breathing. Let them come. We have their wrecks. We can scrap their metal. We can study their tech. Every time they send something, we just get stronger. He walked to the door and looked back at Amy. Sound the all clear, but tell the teams to get out there and salvage everything. If that ship crashed intact, I want that engine. Jason walked out of the command center and onto the balcony. The cold wind hit his face. He looked up at the sky, where the smoke was clearing. The stars looked down, indifferent. For 5 years, humanity had been hiding. They had been digging in the dirt, trying to survive. Today, they had punched the galaxy in the nose. It felt good. The fear was gone. The Council had made a mistake when they thought humanity would be an easy target. They thought that by rejecting them, they were dooming them to die. Instead, they had created a monster. The aliens were fast and pretty, but they were fragile. Humans were heavy, ugly, and hard to break. Jason watched the salvage crews driving out toward the crash sites. They were moving fast, eager to take apart the alien machines. This was just the beginning. The Council was going to come back, and when they did, they wouldn't find a scared group of refugees waiting to be locked up. They would find an army of iron and rage, waiting to tear the sky down. The news from the core worlds traveled fast, even to the edge of the galaxy. In the polished, clean halls of the Council chambers there was panic. The destruction of the patrol squadron was not just a military loss. It was a humiliation. Species that had feared the Council for thousands of years were whispering in the dark. They were saying that the primitive humans had defeated the elite guardians. But in the Outer Rim, there was no panic. There was only work. Ryan stood on the balcony of the governor's tower, the highest building in the colony. He wore a heavy coat made of synthetic wolf fur, the kind that could stop a knife. The wind whipped his gray hair around, but he didn't feel the cold. He was watching the shipyards. It was a magnificent sight. Where there used to be empty red rock, there were now skeletons of giant steel beasts. Thousands of workers in bright orange suits moved like ants over the massive frames. Cranes lifted heavy plates into place. Sparks flew like fireworks as welders fused the metal together. The shipyards never slept. The noise was a constant low rumble that you could feel in your bones. "It is coming along," Sarah said, walking up beside him. She held a tablet in one hand and a cup of hot coffee in the other. She was the head of intelligence, and she looked even more tired than Ryan, but her eyes were sharp. "Is it fast enough?" Ryan asked, not looking at her. He couldn't take his eyes off the ships. "The Council is assembling a fleet," Sarah said, her voice flat. "We intercepted a code and transmission. They are calling it the Cleansing Force. It includes ships from the 5 strongest member species. They are not bringing patrol boats this time, Ryan. They are bringing dreadnoughts. They plan to turn this planet into a molten ball of rock." Ryan took a deep breath of the thin, metallic air. "Good." "Good?" Sarah looked at him like he had lost his mind. "Ryan, they are bringing enough firepower to glass the surface. We have maybe 20 battleships finished. They have hundreds." Ryan turned to face her. He smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who was holding a winning hand in a poker game. They are bringing hundreds of ships that rely on shields and precision lasers. They are coming here to fight a war of elegance. But look at what we are building, Sarah. Look at our ships. Sarah looked down at the shipyard again. She really looked at them. The human ships didn't look like the sleek silver arrows of the aliens. They looked like flying bricks. They were covered in thick armor plating. They had huge, ugly engines that belched black smoke. They were bristling with heavy rail guns and missile tubes. There were no graceful curves, just sharp angles in heavy steel. "Our ships are ugly," Sarah admitted. "They are tanks," Ryan said. "The Council thinks shields are the ultimate defense. They think if you shoot an energy beam, you block it with a shield. But we learned something from the planet. The best shield is mass. We don't have shield generators powerful enough to stop a dreadnought beam, so we put 3 meters of solid titanium alloy on the front of our ships. They will still outgun us," Sarah insisted. "Maybe," Ryan said. "But we have something they don't. We have desperation. And we have their wreckage." He pointed toward a secure hangar at the edge of the yard. "Tom and his teams have been reverse engineering the drives from the patrol ships we shot down. We combined their engine design with our heavy industrial reactors. Our ships are slower, yes, but they have more power output than anything the Council has ever seen. We can overcharge our rail guns. When we shoot, we don't just scratch their paint. We punch through their hulls and out the other side." Sarah looked at her tablet. "The estimates say the cleansing force will arrive in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Ryan repeated. "That means the first fleet has to be ready to launch by tomorrow." "That is impossible," Sarah said. "The crews need training." "They don't need training," Ryan said firmly. "They have been fighting this planet for 5 years. They know how to fight. Just put them in the seats." He walked back into the office and sat at his large desk. It was covered in maps and reports. "Send a message to the other colonies. Tell them the war is here. Tell them to launch everything they have. Every freighter, every mining barge, every tug. If it has a gun, strap it on. If it has an engine, fly it." Sarah nodded. She began typing on her tablet. "And what do we tell the Council? They will demand our surrender before they attack." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Tell them nothing. Let them wonder. Let them be afraid of the dark." Over the next 10 days, the colony transformed into a war machine. The atmosphere on the planet was electric. People didn't run to the shelters. They ran to the armories. Miners traded their drills for rifles. Engineers slept next to their consoles so they could work the moment they woke up. Ryan visited the front lines. He walked through the barracks where the new recruits were gathering. They were young, born on the journey or in the first years of the colony. They were taller than the Earth-born humans. Their skin was tougher from the radiation. They wore the exoskeleton armor like it was part of their bodies. "Governor!" a young soldier shouted, snapping to attention. It was Miller, the same man who had opened the water valve during the storm. He looked bigger now, his chest filled out by the serum. "At ease, Miller," Ryan said. "Are you ready?" Miller grinned, tapping the heavy metal chest plate of his armor. "We've been waiting for this day, sir. We dug the holes. We poured the concrete. We built the walls. We poured the concrete. We built the walls. I'm tired of hiding. I'm ready to go knock on their front door." Ryan looked at the hundreds of soldiers in the room. They weren't looking for peace. They were looking for a fight. The Council had tried to bury them, but they had just turned into seeds planted in concrete. Now they were breaking through, harder than ever. The day of the arrival started with a silence. The sensors picked up the Council fleet dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. There were so many ships that they blocked out the stars. Ryan stood on the bridge of the Iron Will, the flagship of the human fleet. It was a massive, ugly ship, painted with a big white shark mouth on the front. Sarah was next to him, coordinating the tactical display. "They are hailing us," the communications officer said. "Put it on the main screen," Ryan ordered. The face of the alien High Admiral appeared. He looked exactly like the others Ryan had seen 5 years ago. Perfect, arrogant, and soft. "Human rebels," the Admiral said. "You have proven to be a disease. Your resistance is illogical. We have enough ships here to turn your planet to ash. Surrender now and we will spare your civilians. Refuse and you will be erased." Ryan walked forward to the camera. He didn't look like a diplomat. He looked like a warrior. He was wearing a combat vest, and his face was scarred from a mining accident years ago. "You talk too much," Ryan said. "You rejected us. You said we were too violent. You said we were chaotic. You were right. We are all those things. And now we are coming for you." The alien's eyes widened in shock. "You cannot be serious. You have no shields. You have no honor." "We have anger," Ryan said, "and we have a lot of guns. Fire." The human fleet didn't move elegantly. They didn't form complex geometric patterns. They just charged forward. The sky filled with missiles and railgun slugs. The alien ships launched their own barrage, expecting the human shields to flare and die. But there were no shields. The alien beams hit the human ships and burned away the outer armor, but the ships kept coming. They didn't stop. They absorbed the hit, the heavy steel plating glowing red-hot, and they fired back. It was a brawl. It was a knife fight in a phone booth. Human ships rammed alien vessels when their guns ran dry. Boarding parties launched in suicide pods, crashing into the alien bridges, and fighting hand-to-hand with the shocked crew. Ryan watched the battle unfold on the screen. It was chaotic. It was messy. It was exactly what the Council feared. "They are breaking," Sarah shouted, pointing at a cluster of alien dreadnoughts. "Their formation is collapsing!" "They don't know how to fight us at close range. Push them," Ryan ordered. "Drive them back. Don't let them retreat." The battle raged for hours. When the smoke finally cleared, the alien fleet was in ruins. Half of them were destroyed, and the rest were fleeing back into hyperspace. The human fleet was battered, burning, and barely holding together, but they were still there. Ryan stood on the bridge, looking at the retreating enemy ships. The silence returned to the room, but this time it wasn't a nervous silence. It was the silence of victory. "We did it," Sarah whispered. "We defeated the Council." Ryan shook his head slowly. "No, Sarah. We didn't defeat them. We just hurt them. We woke them up." He looked out the viewport toward the stars, toward the center of the galaxy where the core worlds lay. The Council had rejected humanity because they were afraid of what humans might become. Today, they found out. Humans were no longer petitioners. They were no longer refugees. "We are not going to chase them," Ryan said, his voice loud and clear for the whole crew to hear. "We are going to keep building. We are going to keep getting stronger. The Council thinks this is a war they can win with pretty ships. But we know the truth. This is our galaxy now. They just live in it." The shipyard began the repair work immediately. The humans didn't celebrate for long. There was too much work to do. The rejection was over. The time of humanity had begun, and it would be built on steel, sweat, and the will to never surrender again.